Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. I am Brent Dunlap. I work with Controlco. You're going to see a quick poll in the beginning here, so if you could take the time to just answer that very quickly, we would appreciate it very much. And the format for today is we will be introducing an exciting new product that we are distributing in the United States and beyond, called Optigo Networks. And I have brought in Eric with Optigo to do an overview of the product and also kind of give you a little bit of story and context of why you would want to maybe separate an IT network from an OT network, talk a little bit about what an OT network is and that sort of thing. A couple things that I want to make sure you guys know as we're going through this today is please ask questions. We want to make this interactive, so I will be fielding questions and be slowing Eric down if we need to kind of interject and highlight something that you guys are interested in. So as questions come in, I'll be asking them. Then also this will be a recorded webinar. So if you feel like you're missing something, don't worry, it will be recorded and you can go back for your reference. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Eric, who will be able to take you through the Optigo Network story, as well as give you a little bit more deeper dive on the Optigo Network product line, and then talk a little bit about the use case of an OT network solution. So Eric, go ahead and take it over.
Thank you very much, Brent. So as Brent said, my name is Eric from Optigo Networks. So what I wanted to talk about today is sort of start off with the whole question of what is an OT network? Does it make sense for it to be converged with an IT network or separately? Spoiler alert, we believe it's separate. And then we'll talk about sort of why we think that, what are the justifications, what are the things that make it worthwhile to have two networks. And then once we have sort of established some of the reasons there, we'll introduce the Optical Connect product line as our solution that's specifically for an OT network. We really feel that we are the only networking solution that is really focused on operational technology. Most of the other networking solutions are designed for other types of applications, typically enterprise or telecom, and they're just trying to drop their solution into an OT network. And what we end up there is with sort of if you're either going to go fully consolidated, or if you have a separate network, it's just going to be a duplication, right? What Optigo's goal is if we're going to have a separate network, it needs to be designed for and optimized for the needs of an OT network, of OT devices, OT services, OT technologies, and OT managers. We understand that these are quite different than the needs of IT. So I'll start off by sort of understanding what the differences are, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so yeah, basically just understand the specific areas where OT is different. Particularly, I'm going to focus on planning, administration, management, the network requirements, and quite importantly, security. Security is a very big one for networks these days. We'll also introduce Optical Connect and understand exactly how it's optimized for IT. So you've seen the terms IT, OT, IP, IoT, right? So IoT is sort of the buzzword of the day that basically reflects two concepts. Number one is that Internet Protocol, or IP, is really going to replace any other type of network out there, whether it's proprietary, whether it was, in the typical days, you would have a different type of networking solution for every service. So you had your coax connections for CCTV, you had your MSTP for HVAC and fire safety, everything had its own network. As we move forward, we're seeing that Internet Protocol and Ethernet is becoming the de facto standard that's used to connect everything. And then because it's the same technology, that does make it possible that we could consolidate the networks, right? But when we do that, we have to remember that there's two distinct categories of services, right? We have information technology, which is the typical, PowerPoint, emails, servers, as well as a lot of very specific things for the vertical we're dealing with, right? Like for healthcare, we're going to have, patient data records and prescriptions and all this. For finance, we're going to have point of sale systems, transactions, high frequency trading, all of that type of stuff. We all consider that to be information technology, which varies tremendously based on what the client is. On the other hand, we have operational technology. So in the context of smart buildings, when we say operational technology, what we really mean is things that are bolted to the building and require connectivity, right? So we're talking about elevators, lighting, control systems, smart power metering, all these type of things, as well as physical security. So if we look at these different types of services in a building and we start to group them by, which of these services are considered OT, which of these services are considered IT, very quickly we can see some key differences in what the needs are. So there's different needs in bandwidth, in how often things change. Not only how often do devices change, but how often do users change, how often does software change, right? It's a various case between like an iPad, a user gets a new iPad whenever they feel like it, they install apps whenever they feel like it, the apps get updated pretty much every 2 or 3 days, it seems. They pump up the update so often, right? And so that's a very, very different scenario than a security camera, which is, designed and installed by a professional, right? And typically, it's not going to be changed until it fails. And software upgrades are going to be done in a maintenance window that's planned in advance, right? Also, in terms of internet access, when you're dealing with an IT network nowadays, the default is that internet access is expected, right? For every IT device, it has to have internet access. For OT devices, the internet access requirements are, planned in advance and typically limited, right? So if we look at power metering, smart metering, for example, yes, of course, that information needs to get to the internet, but the only place on the internet that it makes sense for that to go is the power company or perhaps some, power monitoring service or something, but we know about it in advance, right? So there's no need to provide general case open access to the internet for these types of services. It can be planned in advance and allowed on a use case as needed basis. So all of these types of network requirements are going to vary significantly from IT to OT, and a one-size-fits-all solution is probably not the best way to go about that. We believe that not only is it going to open you to a lot of potential security risks, it's not going to provide the best value in the network, right? So when we consider like, hey, we have the opportunity to collapse these onto a same network because they happen to use the same underlying technology. Consolidation in general is considered a good thing, but it is possible to have too much of a good thing, right? So what we really want to do is, as we consider what to consolidate, we consider these groupings of services by class and by, the similar needs need to be the driver for what gets consolidated. Sound good so far, Brent?
Yes. So, maybe elaborate a little bit more on why it's important for us in the building automation industry to kind of be cognizant of bandwidth for not only the IT network, but the OT network as well?
So bandwidth is actually, so I'm jumping back to the bandwidth side. So bandwidth is a very interesting concern because the vast majority of OT services actually use quite little bandwidth. If you consider CCTV video, that is actually a fairly significant bandwidth concern. So what happens is that with when you're planning a network, if you're looking at a service that doesn't require much bandwidth, you might tend to ignore its needs. But even though the bandwidth is very low, the importance of those messages is very high. So from a quality of service perspective, they're not going to impose a significant load on the network, but it is absolutely critical that those packets get through, right? If a packet says, you know, turn on the heater or turn on the light, that's very important that it gets through.
So would it be safe to say that if everything is on one network, including IT, which an IT we can see here with, you know, it's a variable as far as high and low bandwidth peak, that sometimes some of this critical information, you know, could be affected at high peak times on the IT side if it is all consolidated on one network?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. And the real difficulty is it's unpredictable, right? So there may be certain times when everything works fantastically, and then all of a sudden, you know, there's an update released for a bunch of computers, or everyone happens to be watching YouTube at the same time, then the performance of the network suddenly degrades, and your services, your critical services become impacted on that. And then if you call in the guys to have a look at it later on, the network performance might be better at that point, so they're not really going to be able to replicate or understand the issue because it's transient and it's related to the activity. On that point, something I want to introduce is the difference between an undersubscribed network and an oversubscribed network. So typically an IT network has a certain amount of bandwidth available, and as to the usage, it's pretty much a free-for-all, right? The email uses as much as it can. If it has more, it downloads your email faster. If not, it's a little bit slower. And you basically just use up everything available, right? On an OT network, right, typically the bandwidth is going to be planned, right? So if I know I have, you know, 1 gig or 10 gig available, I'm going to say, okay, I assume that I have this many cameras that are going to use 20 megs each. I'm going to allocate that. I'm going to allocate a certain amount of bandwidth for each of the other services, and I'm going to leave some headroom so that I don't ever anticipate that this critical services network would run out of bandwidth, right? So it's a very different story between, you know, hey guys, this much is available, go for it, and this is a planned network, this is how much bandwidth I need, so I designed the network to have that much bandwidth, and then I know that I'm not going to max it out.
Very nice, thank you.
Okay, so moving forward, if we compare some of these different groups of technology in terms of who owns it, who manages, who's planning it, I'm not going to go through each of these boxes in detail. The key point here is that on every category we think about it, there's a difference between IT and OT. If anyone has any specific questions on the information in there, please feel free to ask them. I think I mentioned them, but in general, the concept is that these are very different types of services with different requirements. Any thoughts on something you see there, Brent?
I think that looks good. That's pretty straightforward. I don't have any questions coming through on the audience, so I think we're good to go.
Okay. The other thing is when you look at who the stakeholders are, you've got your IT department, and I want to talk a little bit about how IT departments typically react to this whole question of what are OT services now that they're IP, how do we deal with it? I saw from the poll at the beginning, we have quite a few people considered IT on this webinar, so this is an interesting topic. Basically, in my experience introducing Optigo and trying to position this as an OT technology and talking to people, I get one of two primary reactions, right? One reaction, which is what I've listed here in the slide, is that the IT department has the concept that if this is an IP device, right, and it's going in my building, I want to know about it and understand it and control it and incorporate it into my IT system, right? They don't want to have IP devices that are in the building that they don't know about, right, or they don't control. And there's a number of reasons for this. It could be that they're trying to, say, hey, the more devices I have managed, the more budget I'm going to be allocated. I want to, hire more staff. I want to, have a large control of what's going on. It could also be like, if they have an IP device in their building, they're very concerned that that could be a potential security risk, right? So if they're gonna, they basically accept it as a given that this device is going to be there, it's going to be a risk, so they want to know about it and be on top of it and understand and control it so that they can do their best to mitigate that risk, right? So that's sort of the IT desire to own the network. Now there's a very different view taken by some IT people that we've talked to, and it basically says these devices are going in. In the past, cameras had nothing to do with IT. In the past, HVAC controllers had nothing to do with IT. It was much simpler in that scenario, right? And I would prefer that it stayed that way, right? I would prefer that I don't need to consider the security implications of, all of these security cameras being on the network, or all of these vending machines being on, or all of these access control. So they would actually prefer that the facilities managers take ownership of these devices and all of the potential risks associated with them, right? So not only security concerns, but also administration management concerns. Also, they're concerned about the number of devices, right? If you look at IT, their management strategy is active management, active monitoring, active control. That works pretty well when you have, laptops and servers where they're sort of known devices and you can track like, okay, this is this employee and everything. But as you go to a whole IoT scenario, the number of devices in the building scales very much, right? Like as you go, the original concept of telecom was connecting places. Then we went to connecting people. As we go to connecting devices, right, we take an order of magnitude increase in the scale with each step. So there's simply too many devices that the IT doesn't really understand or know about, and their view would be like, it would be much easier for me if I could just get all of this stuff off my network and sort of draw a ring fence around it so that the risk of these devices causing a problem for me is much less. So, so those are the two sort of focuses of IT, or two attitudes taken. I've seen them both as we look for this as we go through this conversation. Any thoughts there, Brent?
I think we're good to go. Everything is looking good.
Okay. So as we go into, what are the kind of conversations that we have when we talk to people about IT and OT? these are some of the potential pain points that could come up, right? So our IT policy says we can only use Cisco for IP devices, right? But these are HVAC devices. The responsibility is for the HVAC contractor to install them. They don't know how to use the Cisco, or they don't have an expert experienced in CLI configuration. So this could lead to something like a very expensive Cisco certified contractor coming in at a per day rate. Something like that. That's a potential pain point. Another pain point is that this comes up a lot when you have a shared tenant building where you need to have your OT devices in first, but the IT network may not even be there because the IT network may be the responsibility of the tenant, right? So in the case of a multi-tenant building, you could have multiple IT networks, up to one per floor, but you still need to put in OT devices before, right? And then again, there's just the issues that come up with if you are a facilities person, if you're a facilities integrator, if you're a facilities manager, right, you're used to being able to have control of your own destiny, right, to be able to guarantee your own deliverables. But if there's a dependency on IT involved, then all of a sudden you lose the ability to guarantee your own success or guarantee your own timelines, right? Now, I mean, for some people that might be great because they have someone else they can blame, but for most people, you know, they just want to get things done, and they would like to have the control over it themselves without seeing IT as sort of a gating delay of these type of facilities projects. So has anyone here, if I'm just going to throw this out to the audience, if you've experienced a pain point that is similar to some of these or different or anything at all, or if you don't agree that these are real pain points, please throw your questions or comments into the question box, and we'll have a look at what some of those are. So I'm going to keep going, but this is really important, really interesting to us to understand what the pain points are that you guys are seeing, and do these resonate with you? So security is a big concern for now, and I want to talk about a couple of the vulnerabilities for IT and OT. One of the most famous cases that everyone talks about was the Target hacking, where Target was hacked through an HVAC contractor, and then they were able to get into their point of sale and get the credit card information. That one was actually a little bit different because it was actually through a accounts payable system that they were able to get in. So it wasn't actually through the OT network or any of the OT devices. So I wanted to bring up a couple of other scenarios that are even more relevant. So one scenario is that people come from the internet, they reach into the OT devices, and then they hijack those devices and either use them for attacks back out to the internet. So you could turn your security cameras into spam mailers, right? Or you could use the HVAC controllers to launch a denial of a service attack against Sony or some other target that's outside. You could also see a case where people come in from the internet, get into the OT devices, and then use them as a launching point to launch an attack on IT targets within the same organization. So we have an example that will be, we'll send this.
So, Eric, not to interrupt, but a couple other pain points that came through. The IT design has data drops in locations that are nowhere near where the HVAC devices are installed, or they're were not enough. So that is a pain point that one of our attendees has brought up. Other pain points is general contractors want to do things the familiar way to avoid risk, and often the cheap way, anything that is technologically progressive, perceived as more expensive. Conversation ends quickly.
Okay, yeah, those are a couple of excellent points, Brent. To address the first one, if we have a network that's designed for IT, of course they're going to have the drops in the places where they expect people to sit and work, in the server room and things like that. They're not going to have them in the on the rooftop or in we've seen some of the Optigo IT networks deployed in underground tunnels, in superstructures above the building, in utility poles. All of these kind of scenarios are OT type deployments. So yeah, definitely the reach becomes important. With an IT network, typically it's designed so that everything is well within the range of Cat5. There might be some fiber used, but it's not as common, and it's usually the fiber is used for bandwidth. With an OT network, you can have devices that are scattered throughout a building or campus, and it also might be kind of difficult to connect them with traditional networking because you only have one camera on a pole, so it doesn't make sense to put a 24-port switch there, obviously, right? So you need to have a point of presence in terms of the equipment you're deploying and how you're connecting it up that is really optimized for the physical topology of what you're deploying and where you need those devices. And yeah, it's definitely a valid point that the OT device distribution and IT device distribution is not the same by any means. And then the second point, what was that quickly?
Yeah, so he was just bringing up that general contractors want to do everything the regular, familiar way to avoid risk, and so often the cheap way is the way, or anything that's technologically progressive is perceived as more expensive, and so the conversation ends quickly, and that is a pain point that is
right.
That is being
okay,
brought.
So I mean, yeah, there is a general understanding that something is new. So if it's new, it may have a higher risk of who knows what going on, and it could be, you're paying bleeding edge costs, right? That is true in general. But one thing we have to remember is that if we look at the cost, the technology that we're deploying for an OT network is Ethernet, it is IP. These are not new technologies, right? They may be new for this industry, and it may be new to put certain devices on an IP Ethernet network, but the network itself is not new. In fact, it's been around since the 80s. As well, sometimes having these type of networks can actually be significantly less expensive. I'm going to use an example that I have later, which is PoE, or Power over Ethernet. Using Power over Ethernet can be vastly cheaper than having a separate data connection and a power connection to each device. As well, one of the great opportunities of Ethernet is that you can share the cost of your network across multiple services, right? As well, the troubleshooting and diagnosing and commissioning times of a managed network based on Ethernet can be much quicker and easier and less costly based on that. And then a final point on the risk, and I think this brings up a really good point, right? Mm-hmm. If you are looking at, I want to deploy, I'm an HVAC guy, I have my controllers. If I put in MSTP, I know exactly what it's going to take. I know exactly what cable to put in. I know exactly where to pull it. I know exactly how to connect it. So I have full control, and it's not like when I walk in there, there could be surprises, right? However, if you go with the case of I'm going to walk in there, meet the IT guys, find out what kind of support they can give me, find out if they're confident, capable, and cooperative or not, right? Then that is a huge risk factor, right? So if if you consider, like, I'm going to introduce IP as a technology, but it also could vary on every project I do with a different team and a different solution for the network, that is a more significant risk. On the other hand, if I say I'm going to put in IP and Ethernet technology, but I'm going to do it the same way, and I'm going to put in an OT network that I know exactly how it's going to work, and I can even do it myself, then that brings the risk down significantly.
So, Eric, a couple more pain points that are being brought up that I think are worth sharing as well. I want to, get everyone's voice out there. Is one has a delay in bringing any offline devices online because we have to involve IT people. So, I think that kind of feeds into what what we'll get into as far as separating that OT network, where you would be able to solve that pain point by controlling your own destiny and in a way.
Yeah,
another pain
exactly.
point brought up.
I'll just respond quickly to that one at a time.
Yeah.
And that could be due to the fact that you're waiting for someone on IT. They may not see you as a priority. They may be understaffed. The guy might be on vacation, right? Or it could also be due to the fact that the IT department is not there yet, right? Depending on how this commissioning, you may be putting in your HVAC well in advance of IT, right? So there simply isn't the equipment there, and you have to wait for it, right?
Yep.
So go ahead with the next one.
Yeah, so another one, our OT devices are communicating unreliably on the IT network, but IT claims nothing is wrong.
Yep. So that is the case where we actually have an example of this that I'm going to talk about recently. It's just predictability. As I mentioned, the IT network at some points it could work wonderfully. At other points it could not work at all. It's really kind of a black hole to you, right? You don't have that predictability and consistency in performance, and there's really no way that you can address that other than having control of your own destiny.
And one as well, IT insists that every Ethernet-capable OT device must have an IP address. Another pain point.
Right. Okay. So I guess that would be, we want to deploy BACnet over Ethernet, for example. We do not want to use IP addressing. I mean, it's for good reasons that IT has those rules in place. They're related to security, and I mean, they're very well-intentioned rules. They're not just trying to be difficult, right? However, in a lot of cases, it may make more sense to just have Ethernet to Ethernet communication at layer 2, right? And when we do this, it's important that they be kind of isolated, right? So having layer 2 communication without IP addresses, it's a very effective way, especially if you're having a large number of devices and you don't want to configure them individually with an IP address. That's exactly why BACnet over Ethernet is popular. However, when we do this, the best practice recommendation is to keep those devices isolated, right? Now that could be on a separate VLAN or a separate network, or a separate VLAN on a separate network. There's some good strategies to deal with this, but dumping them onto an IT network is not going to provide that solution. Yeah. So excellent. Thank you, everyone, for those pain points. That's really, really useful stuff.
And one follow-up that is more of a statement is on the general contractors, is that typically they are buying all the OT vendors, and that is a stakeholder group that needs to just be more educated on converging OT systems onto a single network. So that's just kind of a follow-up that we had for one of the questions,
okay.
Or one of the pain points.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks. That's really good, good input and good discussion. Thank you. So back to where I was at with the vulnerabilities. So we had a case which we'll send out to you. It was a news report. A U.S. university, basically someone hacked into their OT devices, which we believe were cameras, and then from there they launched a denial of service attack on the university's DNS system, right? So basically they were able to shut down the proper functioning of the IT network based on an attack that came from devices in the OT network. So that's obviously not good. Another one that doesn't involve IT but is a direct attack on OT was a hotel in Austria. So this was a ski loft or a ski lodge in the Alps, very expensive, very well-to-do customers attending, paying a lot of money for their ski vacations. They had, the standard card key access to the rooms for each hotel room, which was digital, of course, and hackers found a way from the internet to this OT system, and they were actually able to take control of it and shut it down, which literally locked out the guests from their rooms. They went down to the front desk, said, hey, I need a new key, my key's not working. They would issue a new key, it still wouldn't work. Then they received an email demanding a payment of Bitcoins in order to allow the guests back in the room. They really had no choice and they had to pay it, right? So this is actually a really interesting case because the OT network itself could be the target, right? I mean, you could have a terrorist attack that literally freezes people by, turning off the HVAC in the building, right? You had an attack on Sony previously, which was in retribution to North Korea that didn't really like what Sony was doing with the movie. They attacked their IT, right? But they could also have attacked their OT and literally turned the lights out in their buildings. So OT could be a target because it's a jumping point to an IT target, or OT could be the target itself, right? The other thing is human factors, right? People, trying to control every person in your building is difficult, right? Sometimes people see a port and they might just be like, oh, I wonder if it has internet access. I could watch YouTube, or I could plug in a Wi-Fi router and, get internet access in the closet. Or, there's people will sometimes innocently, sometimes not. They'll just have a tendency to try and see what's there. So we feel that port security is very important. On the IT side, they typically use this where the ports are open, and then if you plug in and you start doing something, they're going to monitor the traffic. On the OT side, we actually have the opportunity to do better than that and actually block them from even accessing the port in the first place. Effective individual port security is not really a viable possibility in an IT network because, as I mentioned, there's so much churn in users and devices, right? So the two things about having internet access to OT network, you want to make sure that it's limited to just what you need, which reduces the value of a target of the OT network, both as a jumping point into IT and as a target itself. So with security, breaking it down, again, I'm not going to go into all these details, but the feasibility of different approaches to security varies significantly based on the number of devices, the churn in devices and software. All of these things are important. Two things I want to mention specifically is the regulatory compliance. So when we're dealing with networks in finance or healthcare or other industries, there are very specific regulations. So HIPAA is the regulation for healthcare, which relates to patient data confidentiality. And there's PCI DSS is a regulation for anywhere involving point of sale terminals. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but if your client is in a certain industry and you say, oh, here's my devices to plug into your network, that may be a conversation stopper, because they say, well, you can't plug in unless it's certified with this regulatory that's specific to our industry, right? So you could either go and try to secure some sort of certification for all of your devices, but the far more easy solution is say, okay, we're going to air gap separate these devices from the network that requires this regulatory certification and completely avoid it. So moving forward on costs, all throughout this we've been making the case that it is better to have two networks. One is IT and one is OT. But of course, what we don't want to do is double the cost of the network, right? If your OT network is just a copy of your IT network and it's exactly the same, then I've literally just doubled my networking cost, which is not good, right? So what we need to do is optimize the OT network in terms of where is it going to be present, right? What type of traffic is on it? What are my needs in terms of security and bandwidth and internet access? And you really want to make sure that the cost of an OT network is both optimized and it also can be shared among as many OT services as possible. So coming together, if we say that the perfect world situation, this is sort of the ideal case for a fully consolidated network in which it's a single organization for the building, so that you don't have any issues with landlord-tenant, you don't have any issues with multi-tenant and multi-IT staff. There are no security concerns at all, because it's a perfect world, and everyone gets along, everyone works very well together and understands each other's priorities. Clearly, this is not a real-world case. What we do have is a real-world vision where we consolidate similar services in operational technology, and we consolidate similar services for information technology, and we really have two networks which are purpose-built and optimized for their types of traffic. So I think basically from the consolidated network, it does save a little bit overall in capital cost only, but when you consider total cost of ownership for all of these, the multiple points of an isolated network really add up to make the difference. So I'd now like to introduce Optigo and how it is best suited to be the operational technology network. So Optical Connect is our networking product from Optigo. It's really designed along the ideals of simplicity and security. So when we start with the Optigo head end, it's based on a single mode fiber connection. The efficiencies in cabling are realized through passive optical networking technology, where we can take a single mode fiber and we can split that many times, and then that goes into our edge switches, which are distributed throughout the building. We offer a variety of form factors, port counts, and PoE and non-PoE for those edge switches. So whether it's a utility pole, whether it's an electrical panel, or whether it's a rack with a large number of devices coming in, we have a good edge switch for that need, as well as we have some hardened units for outdoor utility poles, etc. The most important value of the Optical Connect system is that there is no configuration or management of any of the edge switches that needs to be done individually. When we plug in those edge switches, they are all plug-and-play connectivity to the head end. If you're just looking for a simple network that passes traffic, you simply need to plug in one fiber and that's it. You have full connectivity, right? Then if you want to look at the management interface, which is hosted on the green box, you can start doing things like separating VLANs, you can monitor traffic, you can monitor your PoE consumption, you can remote reset devices which are based on PoE, you can secure your network very simply from our interface. So all those advanced things can be done from one pane of glass, right? There's one IP address, there's one username, there's one password. It's not one per switch. So that simplifies things significantly. When we look at the topologies we can create with this passive optical networking, you really have an opportunity to match the layout of your network to the layout of your building, right? You have the most efficient use of cabling to connect various types of deployments. This can be from a campus or a single building, and we also have redundancy solutions available. Quick comparison of a traditional fiber home run design to Optigo's passive daisy chain design. We're going to save 70 to 80% on the amount of cable you need to run. We're going to need to save roughly 50% on the number of SFPs, as well as saving cost on the core switch. Remember that the typical networking systems were not designed for OT. Sometimes they're going to be overkill. Almost always they're going to be over complexity. Our one view management is really the centralized management. You can have very powerful features from a very simple interface, specifically dealing with the OneClick Secure. This is our solution for port security. So when we have a plug-and-play system for commissioning, that's fantastic. For security, it's a nightmare, right? So along with our plug-and-play offering out of the box, we also have our OneClick Secure button, which provides a single point-in-time lockdown. So the concept is you get your network working, all of your OT devices are commissioned, everything's communicating properly. I know that this is the configuration I want. At one point in time, you click the OneClick Secure, which basically does a freeze on all the communication in the network. So anything that's plugged in currently is preserved, but it prevents any new devices from being added, either to a port that's currently in use or a port that's not in use. It will lock everything down either by shutting down the port itself or by locking it to the MAC address of the connected device. So really what we're trying to do is make security so simple that it's actually likely that it will actually get deployed, right? Of course, it is possible to deploy port security with other solutions, right? I mean, with Cisco or HP, you can log into the box, you can type the appropriate commands for every port to lock it down, but it's much less likely that you're going to do that when it's more complicated and time-consuming. By making it simple, we make it really easy to do, and also if you make a mistake or you need to add something, you can easily unlock it and relock it. So I want to spend the last little bit of time we have talking about some of the projects that Optigo has done. So these are some of our...
And Eric, FYI, we do have some, probably about 3 or 4 questions. I just want to let everyone know that I'm not ignoring them, but
okay.
I'm going to let Eric kind of finish up, and then we'll answer those at the end. So just wanted to give you a heads up.
Well, let's actually do the questions now, and then I'll fill up the rest of the time sort of going over the projects we have so that we don't cut off these questions.
Yeah, perfect. That makes sense. So what we have here is what I am often asked regarding hacking and cybersecurity are the pathways between the OT and the IP networks. For example, a guy on the internet breaking into the OT and planning a virus, i.e. Stuxnet.
Yep. Yep. So that is very good point to bring up. Of course, in the ideal case, the OT network would be completely 100% air gap separated, and there would be no possible way for any traffic to move from the OT to IT. In reality, though, we have scenarios where, well, the smart metering needs to get to the power company, right? We want to be able to allow people to remotely log in and watch the CCTV footage. We need to have reporting of data to our HVAC contractors so they can optimize, right? There will be scenarios where we need access to the internet or access to the IT or corporate network. What we offer with a separate OT network, and also with the way that the Optigo network is architectured, we can bring all of the OT traffic back to a single point. So we can offer a single point of network connection between IT and OT, and this point can be very, very effectively firewalled and monitored for very, very specific traffic that needs to go through. So as I said,
and just to add from Controlco's, and we have a couple products that we carry to do exactly that. So, get in contact with myself and I can, walk you through those as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's sort of a difference in strategy, right? From an IT perspective, everything is in general open and you try to stay on top of it and monitor to prevent attacks, versus from an OT perspective, we can have everything as closed by default and we can allow through exactly what we need in the narrowest way possible. And having those networks separated allows the feasibility of doing it at just a single point of interconnection.
Okay, thank you, Eric. We have a couple more, or 3 or 4 more questions. When we deal with IT level products, the approval process can be cumbersome. With most customers, how well is your product perceived when presented to the IT department?
Yeah, so this is something, probably one of the biggest difficulties we have is if we go into there and just say, oh, you're providing an Ethernet switch or an Ethernet solution that needs to be approved by IT, and our IT has a policy that it's Cisco, or it's a policy that it's HP or something like that, right? So the way that we need to deal with that is not to position it as, oh, we're putting in an Ethernet network, right? We're positioning it as in, we're putting in a facilities network that serves the facilities needs. It happens to use Ethernet technology, but it's not designed to be an IT network, right? It is not facing the same challenges that an IT network faces. It's not dealing with the same type of equipment or services that an IT network typically deals with. So our view is that the Optigo operational technology focused network needs to be evaluated for how well does it meet the needs of an operational technology network, not so much how well does it meet the needs of an IT network, right? And we typically find that once we get them thinking along those lines, they're going to realize, like, oh yeah, okay, a lot of these specific requirements and a lot of the reasons that we've made a high-level decision to go with Cisco, a lot of that is based on requirements that are specific to IT, right? So if we start to think of this as in what are the requirements for these specific services, then they're much more open to bringing in an optimized, purpose-built solution for those services, rather than just considering this as a copy of the IT network. And that's the key point. We're not duplicating or replacing an IT network, right? We're putting in a separate network that's going to be more appropriate for certain services that shouldn't be on the IT network in the first place.
Great, thank you, Eric. Another question coming through. In hospitality, is IPTV/MATV considered IT or OT? If two networks, which is the most suitable for this service?
So CCTV surveillance is an interesting one because typically you have a large number of cameras on one side, then you have your video servers, so with that can be considered OT, but quite often you want to make the video streams viewable and available on the IT networks so that, you know, your typical executive or security manager or, you know, just whoever wants to can sit at their desk and view the video feeds. So what we have in this case is we can have a separation where we have the sort of infrastructure side where all the cameras.
Sorry, Eric, very quickly, not CCTV. He was talking about IP televisions, the TVs in hotel rooms where the hotel operator can put content and have their own promo channel. Plus cable TV provider. Yep.
So IPTV, we would consider that to be, it typically would fall under IT, or in a hotel scenario, there would typically be a network for that specifically. But we can definitely host that on an Optigo network as well. It's not something that we traditionally classify as OT. Honestly, it's probably kind of in the middle. So very, very good question, tough question.
Yeah.
That one is definitely tough to classify.
Yeah, maybe we'll think about that a little bit and see if it's something, you know, that you guys might pursue. A couple more here, and then we'll wrap it up. Can you use VLAN segmentation at the edge switch?
Yes, absolutely. So not only can we use it, but it's incredibly easy. It's point and click, and there's no requirement to synchronize the configuration across switches. So if I go to this switch and I say, okay, it's on VLAN 100 here, and I go somewhere else and I say it's VLAN 100 here, I'm guaranteed that the connectivity between those VLANs is done under the hood. I don't need to create VLANs or ensure that they can reach through the system. So not only can we do VLANs, it's incredibly easy.
And then last question, do edge switches provide device authentication?
They can by MAC address. So currently we support by MAC address. I'm not sure if they're referring to something like 802.1x, which our hardware can support. We don't have this supported through our management interface at the moment, but right now we do support authentication by MAC address.
Okay, great. That is all the questions for now. So we can wrap up with some use cases that we have seen Optigo networks go into, and then I just want to stress that if you guys have any additional questions, all the questions have been great so far, but if you have any additional questions, please reach out to myself, and I will definitely get them answered. You'll have my information and some follow-up material, and then as well as there will be a survey to give you that advantage of being able to ask questions and tell us how we did here. But yeah, Eric, go ahead and wrap up with a couple of use cases, and we'll let everyone get on their way.
Sure. So I understand that people will probably be dropping off, but I'll just talk very quickly about some of the OT network successes we had. CenturyLink Field in Seattle, Washington is an NFL stadium home to the Seattle Seahawks. This was a perfect case of network convergence gone wrong, gone too far. What they had was they had a very sophisticated security system with a number of very high definition cameras. It was deployed on the IT network, right? So they went full consolidation. And the problem was that when there was nothing happening in the stadium, everything worked fantastically, right? There was no other traffic on the network, and because there was no one in the stadium, there wasn't very much bandwidth being used by the video feeds. However, as soon as the stadium filled up for a football game, the amount of activity on the network increased ridiculously, and it led to large drops in the video feeds, freezing frames, glitches, entire feeds dropping out for up to 30 seconds. It was a disaster, right? And when the stadium complained, they went in and tried to analyze the problems, but of course everything worked well when they were trying to figure out what's wrong with it when the stadium was not busy. So basically they just identified that congestion was the issue, and it was unpredictable, and they were not able to guarantee the performance of their system because they were dependent on the level of service provided by IT, which was clearly letting them down. So they contacted Optigo to go in and provide a completely dedicated fiber network where the bandwidth was planned, right? We know how many cameras, we know how much bandwidth they need, and we plan a dedicated network to allocate the appropriate bandwidth to those cameras, and we know that nothing is ever going to come and steal it from them. So this was cameras and access control as well. This project happened very quickly. From the time Optigo got the call to the day it was actually commissioned and fully working was 5 weeks. So this was a really exciting project for us. For clarity, the cameras were already there, everything was there, it's just we changed the network under the hood. So it was sort of a network retrofit, but the actual security solution remained the same. We just provided a better connectivity for it. Also looking at a couple of examples in the HVAC domain. So these are two different examples in two different continents, and they used a very different approach to HVAC. So on the left, we have a mall in Germany, the largest shopping mall in the capital city. It was a retrofit project. They had a number of locations where they had Ethernet access provided by Optigo. And what they did is they basically used Optigo to provide a backbone and provide additional reach to the MSTP network. So all of the HVAC devices were connected with MSTP, just as they typically are done. But what Optigo did is it provided a fiber reach to connect the 15 different locations, and then from those 15 different locations they ran MSTP to the devices. Because this was a retrofit and it was a fairly old building, running a home run fiber was not possible. Running Cat5 was not possible due to the reach. So really, this Optigo solution with just one fiber from one point to one point, and also the ability to daisy chain one IDF to the next, was very critical, because you look at just one fiber coming in, one fiber going out to the next one. That's all you need to pull through the conduit. They didn't have room to pull, 15 fibers through so that one could go to each IDF. That was not possible. So that was basically using the Optigo network to extend the reach, but then using MSTP to actually connect to the HVAC devices. On the other hand, if we look at what they did in Australia on the right-hand side, they did something completely different. And this was we're pretty excited about this. It was Optigo's first deployment of HVAC controls, both VAVs and universal controllers, that was fully connected with Ethernet directly to the device and powered by Power over Ethernet. So that was a major cost savings for them from an overall perspective because they no longer needed to run power to each of the VAVs. So they had a large number of VAVs throughout this building, and they connected them all with just one Ethernet connection. We were also able to monitor the power consumed by these devices, which is kind of cool, as well as the management of them and monitoring the status, online, offline, power consumed. All of this stuff was incredibly easy from a single pane of glass. So two very different approaches to the HVAC challenge. One using MSTP and just extending it, one using Ethernet directly to the device. Optigo works very well with both of these types of solution. Obviously, we would prefer the PoE because it means more ports on Optigo, as well as more easy to monitor devices individually. We can also do a reset of each individual device. So for anything PoE, whether it's an HVAC device or a camera, occasionally from time to time they may get hung up and they may need a reset. So rather than sending someone scrambling through the attic, we can actually trigger a reset of any of the PoE devices directly from our management interface. So that was a cool benefit for them as well. So I think that is it for our webinar. Thanks so much, Brent and Controlco for hosting this and for presenting Optigo. We really appreciate it. We're really excited to work with Controlco as a distributor. And Brent is a great guy. He's caught on to the Optigo stuff very quickly. I would now consider him an expert. So feel free to get all your questions to Brent or to me. We'll be sending out a follow-up to the webinar. Any closing thoughts, Brent?
Yes, we did have a couple questions come in at the end. We will follow up with you directly and make sure that you get all your questions answered. And then as well as everyone who stayed, a little bit after the planned time, thank you very much. And we will be reaching out to everyone individually to make sure that everyone, has all of their questions answered and has, a chance to ask additional questions as well. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're excited about the new technology that we're offering our customers, and we hope that you guys are excited as well.
Yeah. One more thing, we will be sending out links to the news stories I mentioned, as well as some case studies and stats on these projects that we've discussed. So that'll be a good point for you to understand a little bit more about how Optigo applies in the real world.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to let everyone go at this time, and we will, like I said, be on the lookout for follow-up from us individually. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Brent. Bye.